Good morning. Today's class for discussion is pediatric enteric fever. Okay. Can you all see the screen? I think all of you can see the screen. Am I audible? Yeah? Okay. So the enteric fever is being caused by salmonella, a bacteria called salmonella. The exact etiological agent is Salmonella enterica serovar typhi, also known as S. typhi. It is a gram-negative bacterium. There is also another group of Salmonellas, which is also known as Salmonella paratyphi A, Salmonella paratyphi B, and Salmonella paratyphi C. These three cause a less severe disease than Salmonella typhi. The ratio of the disease caused by Salmonella typhi to Salmonella paratyphi is approximately 10:1. What do you understand by this ratio? More common Salmonella disease is caused by Salmonella typhi. So it is a very common disease to occur. And whenever we start reading about an infectious agent or a disease, which is an infectious disease, you have to write the answer in different topics. So you have to write the etiology. The exact etiological agent should be written. You should write the pathogenesis. What are the virulence factors? How that particular bacteria is affecting the human body. Then you have to write about the clinical features. Then the complications of the disease. Then you come to the management. Before going to the management, you have to write the investigations. What are the laboratory investigations you have to do to confirm the disease? So clinically, you're suspecting a infectious disease. What are the laboratory investigations you will do to confirm the disease? And then you will have to write the treatment part. Lastly, is there any preventive measures or vaccinations? Any new vaccines are available, or what are the routine vaccinations that are available? So this is how we are going to do today's class as well. So now coming to the etiology, as I already told you, it is Salmonella typhi. Now we are going to see the virulence factors. So what is very specific about the Salmonella? It has got this polysaccharide capsule, which is known as the VI polysaccharide capsule, VI for virulence. It is present in 90% of the cases of Salmonella typhi or the bacteria of Salmonella typhi, and it protects the bacteria. I will tell you in detail how it is protecting the bacteria. Now we are going to come to the pathogenesis. So now first you should know the mode of transmission. Can anyone tell me how this Salmonella is being spread? Anybody? Yeah, you can please tell me in the. You can on your video or audio and tell me, or you can just put it in the box, in the chat box. So all of us know, right? It is by the fecal-oral method of transmission. So you're going to ingest the bacteria, like any contaminated food material. You've heard about typhoid Mary, right? So she's actually a carrier of typhoid bacteria, and she worked in a eatery or a food distribution unit, and she was shedding the bacteria, and the food which was consumed by so many people got the infection. So basically, it is by contaminated food. So you're ingesting your contaminated food. After that, it invades the body through gut mucosa in the terminal ileum. After that, it passes through the intestinal mucosa, and then the Salmonella typhi will enter the mesenteric lymphoid system and then the lymphatics. So first it is invading the gut mucosa, then it is passing through the intestinal mucosa, and then it is entering into the mesenteric lymphoid system and the lymphatics. From the lymphatics, it is then going to the bloodstream, where it is causing asymptomatic bacteremia, which is culture negative. What is this asymptomatic bacteremia? Which means the Salmonella bacteria is now present in the bloodstream, but it is not having any clinical manifestations. And even if you culture the bacteria now, you will not have any culture positive. So this is known as asymptomatic bacteremia or primary bacteremia. Now it will colonize the reticuloendothelial system where it will replicate inside the macrophages. Now the typhoid bacteria has got a specific protection and inside the macrophages where they are able to survive inside the macrophages and then replicate inside the reticuloendothelial system. What is the reticuloendothelial system? It consists of mainly lymphoid tissues, which is mainly the lymph nodes, the spleen, the liver. And then now this bacteria is shed back into the blood where it causes secondary bacteremia and the symptoms. So this is what you have to know about the pathogenesis. So I've told you the etiology. This is the pathogenesis. Ingestion, invading through the gut mucosa, passing through the intestinal mucosa. Now it's entering the mesenteric lymphoid system, then into the lymphatics, then into the bloodstream, where it is causing asymptomatic bacteremia, which is culture negative. Then it will colonize the reticuloendothelial system, where it will replicate inside the macrophages and then shed back into the blood where it causes secondary bacteremia. And this is the place, this secondary bacteremia, where the symptoms appear. I will discuss what are the symptoms in detail, but now you have to understand this pathogenesis. Now coming to the other virulence factors in the pathogenesis. First, as I've already discussed, it is a surface VI polysaccharide capsular antigen, which interferes with the phagocytosis. Now, normally, when there is any exogenous pathogen which is affecting the human body, our body has some kind of mechanisms or immunity which is going to act against that pathogen. One such thing is your binding of the complement with the bacteria, then leading to phagocytosis. Now, this surface VI polysaccharide capsular antigen of the typhoid is going to interfere with the phagocytosis. How? By preventing the binding of the C3 to the bacterial surface. And its ability to survive within the macrophages is an important virulence trait which is encoded by the 4P regulon. So this 4P regulon is able to ensure that the bacteria is able to survive within the macrophages. Occurrence of diarrhea is there. Sometimes the other virulence factor, because of how does diarrhea is been there in typhoid, it's because of a toxin. This toxin is related to the cholera toxin and the E. coli heat labile enterotoxin. The clinical syndromes of fever, systemic illness, these are mainly due to pro-inflammatory cytokines. Can any of you label the pro-inflammatory cytokines? Yeah, I'm going to wait for you. Please tell me the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is going to mediate your fever and your systemic symptoms. Huh? Okay. Okay. So it is mainly IL-6, interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, TNF alpha. What TNF stands for? It is tumor necrosis factor alpha from the infected cells. Patients with Helicobacter pylori infection have been seen to have an increased risk of acquiring typhoid fever. So there are three main virulence factors which you should remember. One is your VI polysaccharide capsular antigen, which is interfering with the binding of the C3 to the bacterial surface. Next is the ability of the bacteria to survive within the macrophages. It's an important virulence trait encoded by the 4P regulon. And another is a toxin which is causing the diarrhea, which is related to the cholera toxin and the heat labile E. coli enterotoxin. Clinical features. Now, for any infectious disease, you should know the incubation period. What is the definition of an incubation period? Incubation period is a time where the bacteria has infected the body. It is multiplying and it can infect some other person also during that time, but the clinical symptoms have not appeared. So you don't know you're harboring the bacteria as such, but you're still spreading the infection. This is known as the incubation period. The average incubation period for typhoid is about 7 to 14 days, which can also range from 3 to 30 days. And the clinical presentation of this typhoid fever varies from a mild illness. So mild illness means what all you'll have usually for any fever. You will have a low-grade fever. You will have malaise. You'll have some slight dry cough. This is the mild illness. From this mild illness, it can vary up to a severe clinical picture of abdominal discomfort and multiple complications. So this is your clinical features. Some other features also you have, like diarrhea. Diarrhea is mainly mediated by a toxin related to the cholera toxin and the heat labile enterotoxin. Toxicity. What do you mean by toxicity? The child will be very lethargic, very uncomfortable, having so much of fever. 1 second, just excuse me. Yeah, coming back to the class. So toxicity, so toxic looking child will be there, and the complications will be disseminated intravascular complications. So these kind of diarrhea, toxicity, and DIC complications are more common in the infancy period, where there is increased fatality because of the typhoid. What other features are there in adults especially? So this relative bradycardia is a very, very specific feature of typhoid in adults. And some neurological manifestations and gastrointestinal bleeding can also occur in adults, but these features like relative bradycardia, neurological manifestation, and gastrointestinal bleeding are very, very rare in children, but these are common in adults. Now, a question for you. What do you mean by relative bradycardia? You all know what is bradycardia. Bradycardia is a decreased heart rate, less than the normal. When you say it as relative bradycardia, can anybody say? I will wait for your answers. So I'll wait for a minute or so for you to answer. Okay. I think you're not able to tell. I'll explain. Whenever there is a fever, any person who's having a fever will present with tachycardia. For every degree rise in temperature, your heart rate will increase by around 20 beats per minute or so. So you always expect a tachycardia which is associated with fever. But fever is there, but your heart rate is not proportionally increasing with the body temperature. Then you term it as relative bradycardia. Relative to the temperature, your heart rate is not increasing. So these relative bradycardia, neurological manifestations, and gastrointestinal bleeding are rare in children. Now coming to the clinical features according to their occurrences. So first thing is your high-grade fever, which is present in 95% of cases. So a most common clinical manifestation, the most common will be your high-grade fever. Next will be your coated tongue, which is present in 76% of the cases. Anorexia is present in 70%. Vomiting in 39%. Hepatomegaly in 37%. Diarrhea in 36%. Toxicity in 29%. Abdominal pain in 21%. Pallor in 20%. Splenomegaly in 17%. So these are the common manifestations. The most common or the top three being high-grade fever, coated tongue, and anorexia. Now we'll come to the least common manifestations, which is constipation in 7%, headache in 4%, jaundice in 2%, obtundation in 2%, and ileus, which is known as paralytic ileus. Which means there is no bowel movement. So you will start, the bowel will just stop moving. So that is your ileus, which is seen in 1%. And intestinal perforation, which is also a complication, which is seen in 0.5%. So these are the increasing, the most common to the least common clinical manifestations. So all the clinical manifestations which I've mentioned can occur in typhoid fever. Any doubt up till now? So we have actually completed etiology. I have described in detail the pathogenesis and also the clinical features. Now we have to some more points regarding the clinical features. In children, diarrhea may occur in early stages and it can be followed by constipation. What we describe as a fever in typhoid is your classic step ladder rise in temperature, but it is not seen. Why? Nowadays, we have a good antipyretics. So whenever child is having 1 or 2 episodes of fever itself, we give antipyretics. We don't want the child to end up with febrile seizures, right? So whenever the child is having a high grade fever, we already start antipyretics, and giving antipyretics interferes with this classic step ladder rise in temperature. So that is not seen nowadays. There is something which is very, very pathognomic or which is very specific to typhoid fever, the rash of typhoid fever. It is nothing but a macular or a maculopapular rash, which is known as rose spots, which is seen around in the 7th to 10th day. Now, this is seen not in all cases, it is only seen in 25% cases. But if it's present, it is very specific for typhoid fever. And it may appear in crops of 10 to 15 on the lower chest, abdomen, and last for around 2 to 3 days. If no complications occur, symptoms and the physical findings gradually resolve within 2 to 4 weeks. So this is about the clinical features. Now we will go to the complications. First thing is that the patient may have an altered liver function test. But clinically significant hepatitis, jaundice, and cholecystitis are rare, which means when you do a routine lab for your liver, when you do your liver function test, like your AST, ALT, bilirubin, all these may be mildly elevated, but it won't be a clinically significant hepatitis, jaundice or cholecystitis in a case of enteric fever. Now coming to the other set of complications. So in complications, you have your intestinal complications and your extraintestinal complications. What are your intestinal complications? These things, your jaundice, your ileus, the paralytic ileus, intestinal perforation, and even gastrointestinal bleeding. These are your intestinal complications of typhoid fever. And your extraintestinal complications can be classified again into central nervous system complications, cardiovascular system complications, pulmonary system complications, and hepatobiliary system complications. Now, coming to the central nervous system complications. The first complication will be your encephalopathy. Then there can be cerebral edema, there can be subdural empyema, there can be cerebral abscess, meningitis, ventriculitis, transient Parkinsonism, motor neuron disorders, ataxia, seizures, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and psychosis. Such varied complications can occur in your central nervous system. So 3 to 35% cases will have CNS complications. Mainly encephalopathy, starting from encephalopathy up till psychosis, you have a varied CNS complications. Next, you have your cardiovascular system complications. Here you have your endocarditis, you have your myocarditis, you have your pericarditis, it can have arteritis, and it can have congestive cardiac failure. Serious complications are very rare. It occurs only in 1 to 5% of the cases. Next is your pulmonary system complications like pneumonia, empyema, bronchopleural fistula can occur. Hepatobiliary system complications like cholecystitis, hepatitis, hepatic abscess, splenic abscess, peritonitis, and paralytic ileus can occur. These are the hepatobiliary system complications. Pulmonary complications are also very rare, which can start from 1 to 6% cases. And hepatobiliary system again in 1 to 26% cases. So now a quick recap. We have seen the etiology, then the pathogenesis, the clinical features. Again, we've started from the most common to the least common. Then we have discussed the complications where you have your intestinal complications and extraintestinal complications. And in extraintestinal complications, we will discuss CNS complications, CVS complications, pulmonary system complications, and hepatobiliary system complications. Now we have completed the major chunk. Now we have to go to investigations and management. So although we have a clinically high index of suspicion for enteric fever, any child which is toxic looking, coming with high grade fever and intestinal symptoms like diarrhea and constipation, one of the important differential diagnoses in your mind will be enteric fever, salmonella, and now you have to diagnose. So in diagnosis also, you have gold standard in diagnosis, and you have other investigations, and then you have non-specific investigations. Now we'll start with the gold standard. For any infection, if you're able to isolate the organism which is causing the infection, that is the gold standard. For this is applicable for all infections. Here, if you're able to grow a Salmonella typhi from the blood or any other anatomical site of that person, it is the gold standard investigation or the mainstay of investigation. So first is your blood culture, urine culture, and your stool culture. Blood cultures are positive in 40 to 60% of cases early in the course. Before giving the antibiotics, you have to take the sample for blood culture. Stool and urine culture becomes positive after the first week. So blood cultures are very important. It is having the positivity rate up till 40 to 60%, and stool and urine cultures become positive after 1 week. Now we'll come to other laboratory investigations. First, now we're going to all the non-specific investigations. First will be your complete blood count. So when you say complete blood count, you're going to talk about hemoglobin. You're going to talk about all the WBC counts, the platelet counts. Then your differential counts like your neutrophils, lymphocytes, your eosinophils, your monocytes, all that. And also you will have to do something known as the peripheral blood smear to look for the percentages. So this will be your complete blood count with peripheral blood smear. Next will be your liver function test, which may be deranged and may have significant hepatic dysfunction. So deranged LFTs can be there. All the WBC counts are frequently low in relation to the fever and toxicity. They are wide range in counts. In younger children, leukocytosis is common and may reach up to 20,000 to 25,000. But classically, what is seen in typhoid fever is nothing but a leukopenia, that the WBC counts will not rise in relation to the fever and toxicity. But again, younger children can be an exception and they may have a high count. Thrombocytopenia may be a marker of severe infection and may be associated with disseminated intravascular coagulopathy. So if you're suspecting a disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, you have to be doing a coagulation profile, which consists of your clotting time, your bleeding time, and your activated partial thromboplastin time. And the next thing will be a liver function test. 1 second. This is just a second. Okay. So your liver function test may be deranged, but it is significant hepatic dysfunction, as I told you, is very rare. Now we are coming to the other diagnostic test. A very, very commonly used test we all know is your Vidal test. This measures the antibodies against the O and H antigens of the Salmonella typhi, but it lacks sensitivity and specificity, especially in endemic areas. O antibodies will appear on day 6 to 8, and H antibodies appear on day 10 to 12 after the onset of the disease. O titer is considered to be of great diagnostic significance. So all we know about Vidal test is about O and H antigens, but in an endemic area, it will not have any specific specificity or sensitivity. And the O antibodies usually appear on the earlier itself will appear 6 to 8 days, and H antibodies later on. And out of these two, which is more significant is your O titer. Other new test is your nested PCR. You can do your nested PCR using your H1D primers. And you have your typhi-dot test, which is the test kit which uses a 50 kilodalton antigen to detect specific IgM and IgG antibodies to Salmonella typhi. You have another something known as your typhi-dot M test. You have your ideal Tubex test, which detects IgM antibodies but not IgG. What is the significance of IgM and IgG? IgM antibodies will always suggest a recent infection, and IgG suggests a past infection. And DIP yes ticks test. So these are the diagnoses. I'm just going through the diagnosis again. You have your culture, you have your blood culture, you have your urine culture. And if your culture is coming positive, nothing like that, it is a gold standard. In case your culture comes negative, you have to do the other tests like Vidal test. You can do your nested PCR, typhi-dot M, typhi-dot test, ideal Tubex test, and dipsticks test. Vidal test, it is a very commonly used test, but it is not having that much of a specificity and sensitivity. Now, coming to the treatment. So treatment is very straightforward. It is antibiotics. And a wide range of antibiotics are being used for typhoid fever. Earlier, chloramphenicol was widely used in fully sensitive cases. And in case of uncomplicated typhoid fever, you give chloramphenicol. Just a minute. Okay. Now we're getting back to the treatment. Now you have your uncomplicated typhoid fever, where there are no complications, only fever and mild symptoms are there. And a severe typhoid fever, where the patient is literally needs to be admitted. Now in uncomplicated typhoid fever, you have a fully sensitive typhoid fever where you give chloramphenicol 50 to 75 milligram per kilogram per day. You can give it for up to 1 week. For multi-drug resistant typhoid fever, you can give amoxicillin 75 to 100 milligram per kilogram per day for 14 days. Any fluoroquinolone like ciprofloxacin or ofloxacin for 15 milligram per kilogram per day for 5 to 7 days. And cefixime you can give up to 15 to 20 milligram per kilogram per day for 7 to 14 days. So if for multi-drug resistant, you have to give amoxicillin, fluoroquinolone, or cefixime. Amoxicillin is 75 to 100 milligram per kilogram per day for 14 days. Fluoroquinolone, you will give 15 milligram per kilogram per day for 5 to 7 days. Cefixime, you will give 50 to 20 milligram per kilogram for 7 to 14 days. For any quinolone resistant infection, you can give cefixime, azithromycin, or ceftriaxone. Cefixime, again, you know the dose. Azithromycin or ceftriaxone. Azithromycin is generally 8 to 10 milligram per kilogram per day for 7 days. And ceftriaxone, you have to give 75 mg per kg per day for 10 to 14 days. This is for your uncomplicated typhoid fever. For your severe typhoid fever or a complicated typhoid fever, in a fully sensitive, you can give a plain fluoroquinolone or any ciprofloxacin or ofloxacin is sensitive. Here again, your dose is 15 mg per kg per day for 10 to 14 days. Multi-drug resistant, again, a fluoroquinolone is a good enough complication drug. For quinolone resistant severe typhoid, you can give a ceftriaxone or a cefotaxime. Ceftriaxone in the dose of 60 milligram per kilogram per day for 10 to 14 days and cefotaxime for 80 milligram per kilogram per day for 10 to 14 days. Alternative effective drug for uncomplicated is, as I all told you, it is fluoroquinolones. Again, multi-drug resistant, you can give azithromycin or cefixime, and quinolone resistant, you can give cefixime. For severe typhoid, fully sensitive, you can give chloramphenicol or amoxicillin. Multi-drug resistant, you can give ceftriaxone or cefotaxime. And quinolone resistant, you can give azithromycin or fluoroquinolone. So please go through the treatment. It is very, very important. You should know the name of the antibiotic. You should know the daily dose of the antibiotic and the duration. What is optimal therapy, and you have to know the alternative drugs also. So you please go and read the mechanism of actions of every drug, what group these drugs belong to, and how they are affecting the bacteria. You can just brush up with your pharmacology so that you will know the side effects of the drug and how to manage those side effects. Okay. Now, third generation cephalosporins, both oral and injectables, are the recommended for the first line of treatment according to the IAP. So you can either give oral cefixime or IV ceftriaxone. So oral will be cefixime and cefopodoxime peroxetil. Parenteral will be ceftriaxone, cefotaxime, or cefoperazone. Oral third generation cephalosporin to be used high dose in typhoid fever. So usually the dose of cefixime is only 8 to 10 milligram. But if you want to give a typhoid fever, you should use in a higher dose of 15 to 20 milligram. So 15 to 20 milligram given for around 1 to 2 weeks is very, very effective in typhoid fever. Ceftriaxone again, 60 milligram per kilogram, you can go up till 60 milligram per kilogram. That is what they have been telling you, to give a higher dose in typhoid fever. So azithromycin can be used as alternative in uncomplicated typhoid fever, and aztreonam and imipenem, your meropenem group of drugs, can be used as potential second line drugs. For life-threatening infections resistant to all other recommended antibiotics, you can always give a fluoroquinolone. So this is your thing. So first line will be your third generation cephalosporin. Oral will be cefixime and cefopodoxime peroxetil. Parenteral will be ceftriaxone, cefotaxime, or cefoperazone. And for life-threatening infections, you can give your fluoroquinolones. Now coming to the prognosis. So only 2 to 4% of the infected children may experience relapse after the initial clinical response to treatment. And individuals who excrete Salmonella typhi more than 3 months or longer will have infection. After the infection, they are regarded as chronic carrier state. The risk of for becoming a carrier is low in children, less than 2% of all infected children, and this risk of becoming a chronic carrier increases with age. This is where I told you the story of Typhoid Mary. So this Typhoid Mary is an adult woman who became a chronic carrier, and even after months of getting typhoid fever, she was excreting the bacteria, and without knowing, she was infecting so many people who attended where she was working. She was working in a restaurant. That is known as Typhoid Mary. So this chronic carrier state of this Salmonella typhi is very, very specific and common for typhoid, and you should be aware of such things. But this chronic carrier state in children is very, very low, and the risk of becoming a chronic carrier will increase as your age increases. And a chronic urinary carrier state can also develop in children with schistosomiasis. Now coming to the vaccines. Now in vaccines, we have oral vaccine, which is a live attenuated TY21A strain. It has got a good efficacy for up to 5 years. And then you have your VI capsular polysaccharide for 2 years or older. And booster should be given every 2 years. And this efficacy is around 70 to 80%. And VI conjugate vaccine has been proven efficacy in more than 90% in young children. Now, typhoid conjugate vaccine in younger kids, even as low as 6 months, we can give your VI conjugate vaccine, which is your typhoid conjugate vaccine. There are 3 types of vaccines you should understand. And the strain, the TY21A, this strain you should understand. So it can be asked in MCQs also. What is the strain of the bacteria which is used in oral typhoid vaccine? This is TY21A. VI capsular polysaccharide antigen for more than 2 years, and VI conjugate vaccine for less than 2 years, and the maximum efficacy is also for a conjugate vaccine. So now in the IAP recommendation, you give a typhoid conjugate vaccine for around 6 months of age. So now we come to the end of the presentation. Again, I want to go through to everything so that you will have a clear understanding about pediatric enteric fever. I have told you the etiology, the pathogenesis, about the primary bacteremia and the secondary bacteremia. I have discussed in detail regarding the virulence factors, which is mainly VI polysaccharide, the 4P regulon, and the toxin, which is causing the diarrhea. Then I've told regarding the incubation period, the clinical presentation, and about how it is different in infants and children. Again, I'm starting from high grade fever, coated tongue, all this, and which is the most common to the least common. I have described in detail about the pathognomic rose spots. We have also discussed regarding complications, which are intestinal complications and extraintestinal complications. Extraintestinal complications, I have discussed about the CNS complications, CVS complication, the pulmonary system complication, and hepatobiliary system complication. Diagnosis, I have told you the mainstay of diagnosis is your blood culture, followed by the urine and stool culture. If you're able to isolate the organism, nothing like that, that is the gold standard. And again, you have your non-specific investigations, your blood investigations like your CBC and a liver function test. And if needed in complicated state for a DIC and all, you should do your coagulation profile as well. And your specific diagnosis, but not culture diagnosis, will be your Widal, where O antigen is more important. And other diagnostic tests like nested PCR, Typhidot, Typhidot, IDLX, IDL Tubex, and your dipstick test. Now we have discussed about the entire drug therapy. Your first line will be your 3rd generation cephalosporin. And next will be your alternative for uncomplicated will be your azithromycin. For complicated fevers, you can give your ciprofloxacin or ofloxacin, your fluoroquinolones. Now we have discussed the prognosis and chronic carrier state, and one slide for your vaccines, where you can give your oral typhoid vaccine TY21A, your polysaccharide vaccine can be given, your VI conjugate vaccine can be given. So I hope all of you understood regarding the pediatric typhoid fever. Thank you for your attention. You can keep posting your doubts if you have any, and I will try and answer you. You can ask me right now also. Or if you have any more doubts, you can mail it to me so that I can give you a reply mail. You can note down my mail address, is agi12mgmc@gmail.com. I will share it to everybody. Yeah. I hope everybody understood in detail regarding pediatric enteric fever. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you all. I'm just going to end the presentation.